Shall we do a little bit of reading from our book today? Today we'll pick up where we left off yesterday and read a couple of paragraphs, and then we'll skip to another couple of paragraphs, because as I mentioned before, we will not read this entire book page for page, but picking up where we left off. A time frame, however, does not by itself make a history. For that, we needed a concept, a framework, a methodology, a point of view, and we arrived at ours through examination of a major theme of this time. The history of the world is but the essence of innumerable biographies, wrote Thomas Carlyle. And while our history of the world is filled with the stories of both great men and women, scientists and inventors, statesmen and artists, adventurers and entrepreneurs, revolutionaries and politicians, even a couple of ball players, we have chosen to include them only as their lives intersect with what became in this period an even more powerful force, the humble masses, who by their numbers and their utter restlessness with which they greeted a dynamic time, created the story of the 20th century. How else to explain that the two most vital and competing ideologies of this time, communism and democracy, both preached the virtues of centering power with the multitudes and away from a privileged elite? Or that the century's greatest force of evil, the Nazi regime of Adolf Hitler, relied in large part on a manipulation of the force of popular will? Or that the most dynamic development of the last decades of the century has been the global reach of the new communications technologies linking the lives of billions? Or that the most distinctive art of this time is not painting or sculpture or literature, but a new kind of art, a popular art distinguished not so much by its appeal to the minds of critics as by its appeal to large audiences of ticket buyers. Listening to the voices of the masses, to people who have lived through this century, has been our assignment for several years as this book and the ABC and History Channel television series to which it serves as a companion were created. And in so doing, we have asked our subjects to commit themselves to a deceptively simple act: to remember. History is an elusive target. Even when we ourselves have lived through a time, we tend to describe it at first stab the way we have been told it was. Thus, it sometimes seems that all women in the 20s were flappers. Every family in the 50s lived in the suburbs, and the whole world was naked in the rain at Woodstock. We think you'll find that the subjects we chose resist such temptations. They look upon remember as an active verb, helping us to fulfill one determined goal of this project: to not just recite the events of the past, but help readers experience them. For while it may be comforting from our vantage point to look back smugly at the mistakes of history and see them for what they are, it is much more challenging to feel the conflict of emotions present then, in the moment. The best histories don't soothe, they stir. And what more stirring experience than to truly feel oneself inside the catapulting forces that shaped, say, Germany in 1933, Birmingham in 1963, or Chicago in 1968, and ask, how might I have behaved? Thus, we hear from a woman who gave birth by the light of the 1940 London Blitz, and from a German soldier who, while invading the Soviet Union, fell in love with a Russian girl. We listen to the disappointment of a child arriving home during the Depression to discover that her father, in a moment of desperation, has removed the money from her piggy bank. We listen to the story of a young seminary student who participates in the 1967 March on the Pentagon, protesting American policy in Vietnam, aware that his father is inside, helping to execute that very policy. We chart the ever-changing popular attitude from the heady progressivism of the century's first decade to the fear and hopelessness of the mid-century, to the social strife of the 60s and 70s, and the more cautious technological excitement of our own time. Well, that's what we're going to read more about in the coming days. But I hope you enjoyed this reading for today, and I will see everyone next time when we read even more from our book.